What's up, guys? Captain Blade J52 here, and it's been a pretty fair amount of time since I was last able to get any kind of real major content out there for you fine folks here on the channel. I know it's been pretty close to a year since my last upload. Don't think it quite hit the full year mark, but was pretty darn close. And the last video I remember doing was a Vorgon Yajara or Tajara Dreadnought, the Vorgon ship in game that has the 3-5 weapons layout and more weapons in the rear of the ship than it does in the front, which is still to date at the time of recording this the only ship in game to have such a layout. And with the proof of concepts, like we had been doing, we take ships that people might not traditionally associate with being able to tank, and we see, whenever we slap gear on them, what can they really do? How well do they perform? Do they do bad? Do they do good? And we try to go from there. Now, I do want to touch base very quickly on the reasons for the content drought here on the channel, because I do feel I owe you guys at least a very basic explanation in that regard. And I'm not going to go into great detail because it does concern some personal stuff, and that's not something I'm going to share here on the channel, because I know you guys don't want to hear that stuff, and again, because it is, personal stuff. But some of the bits I can talk about is that at the time when I had last mentioned having some personal stuff going on, I still do have some of that stuff going on, but at the time I thought I had stuff worked out to where I could have a little business of my own going, bring in some extra money in that regard, and still have some time to at least get semi-regular uploads out there for you folks. But it ended up not being very practical for the amount of money I had available to try to get started, and it just didn't work out. That's life sometimes. Sometimes your greatest laid plans don't work out the way you expect, and you have to go back to the drawing board. And on that point of going back to the drawing board, I've been studying a good bit, trying to pick up some stuff for my A+ certifications. I'm looking into some different stuff as far as learning how to code, different resources that can help with that. And the last time I did anything major with coding was small-time mods for really, really old games like Star Trek Armada 2 and whatnot, which is about 20 years old almost at this point. I think it's got 1 or 2 years to go, so a pretty good while since I've done anything with that kind of stuff. And in addition to that, sometimes due to the personal stuff, due to allergies, things of that nature, whenever I did have free time in the last little while, I may not have always had the physical or mental energy to actually put something together and get it out there for you folks. Like I say, I do have allergies. Sometimes I wake up and it's just like, getting hit in the side of the head with a brick. Sometimes due to, a sinus headache. It's not something I would wish even on my worst enemy. So, stuff like that's not fun. And sometimes I may not have had the mental energy to do it because maybe I was feeling bad that day due to allergies or some of the other stuff that was going on. You just get tired and don't really want to do anything. But all that aside, that's essentially some of what I can mention. The other stuff, again, I'm not going to talk about here because I know you guys don't want to hear that. But anyway, I do feel like I owed you guys at least that very basic of an explanation. My good friends on TeamSpeak are aware of a good chunk of it, so I'm good as far as that stuff goes. But, anyways, getting into our ship build for today. Alrighty, folks, we had to pause the recording for just a moment. A big old fat notification had popped up in the middle of my screen, and I've corrected that in post. You guys aren't going to actually see that, but yeah, that's why we had to pause for just a moment for people that may have noticed a slight little time skip. But anyway, before we were rudely interrupted by notifications, we were about to get into a brief little history of the Vizier, where it comes from, and such. Now, for those people that aren't familiar with the ship, and your first time seeing it or hearing about it is because of its inclusion in the Muds Marketplace, previously to the Muds Marketplace, the only way you could get the Vizier was through an old Star Trek Attack Wing promotion done by WizKids several years ago. And you would purchase, at least I got mine for about 15 bucks. I've heard of some people paying up to 25, depended on where you picked it up from. But anyway, you got the little starship that was about a little 2 or 3 inch thing, and in the packaging there was a little sheet of paper with a code on it that you could put in for Star Trek Online, and that's how you used to get the Vizier. And even afterwards, for several years, until it was included in Muds Marketplace, that was the only way to get the Vizier, was through that. But with its inclusion in Muds Market, people now have a chance to pick up the ship again, and they don't have to worry about getting charged an arm and a leg by scalpers. But one thing I will mention as far as the Muds Marketplace, when it comes to that, do not, under any circumstances, purchase this ship for 14,000 Zen full price. Do not do that under any circumstances, especially because you can take an extra 1,000 Zen and pick up for 15,000 Zen one of the large mega bundles that they release anytime they put out a major expansion, like Delta Rising, Legacy of Romulus, that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in the Vizier, it's a good ship, but do not pay full price for it. Wait for it to go on sale, because it is intended for there to be regular rotating sales in the Muds Marketplace. So if you're interested in the vessel, wait for it to go on sale. Now, I've made some of my thoughts known to Cryptic as far as my thoughts on the Muds Marketplace, but that's another discussion for another day. Now, with it being included in the marketplace, this brought back some of the old questions that people had even back then, in some cases. Some people were saying, well, why would I want to pick this ship up when I could just grab the Archon and be done with it? You know, the Archon was the first Tier 6 ship we had in the Sovereign class line of vessels, the Vizier, of course, being the second. And some people were saying, well, there's not that much difference between the two. I mean, obviously, cosmetically, there's differences. But the major differences between the Archon and the Vizier is the console they come with, the trait they come with, and then, of course, the cosmetics, but the biggest one being the specialist seating present on the ships. Now, the Archon, of course, being intel-based, whereas the Vizier is command-based. And some people have been a little hesitant to pick it up because of that. But with that, let's go ahead and look at our bridge officer seating. First up, we have a Lieutenant Commander Tactical seat, Ensign Tactical, Commander Engineering, Lieutenant Engineering, and a Lieutenant Commander Universal/Command. So this is the seat that would be different between the Archon and the Vizier, is this Universal seat right here. Now, I will say, in regards to both ships, if you're a fan of the Sovereign class vessels, and you don't care which one you get, then they'll both do you good in that regard. If you're a damage dealer, and your goal is to squeeze as many ones and zeros out of a ship as you can, then, and you want to do it with a Sovereign class type of ship, then I'm going to recommend the Archon for you. Reason being is because it's going to give you more damage dealing oriented tools than the Vizier is going to give you. If you want to tank and you want to use one of the Sovereign class type of ships, then I'm going to recommend the Vizier, because the Vizier is going to give you more survival oriented tools to pick from than the Archon ever could. So both ships have their place and value in today's game, they just don't cater to the same types of builds, which is perfectly fine. It's kind of similar to the two versions of the Cheshire Dreadnought. You've got one that's command, one that's intel. One gives more tank-based tools, one gives more DPS-based tools. Both have value, it's just a matter of what's going to work best for what you want to do with your build. Now, one thing I would say that I would have done different for the Archon and the Vizier both is it involves these bridge officer seats. I would have changed some stuff up if it was me. Because as it sits right now, if you want to have any kind of science powers whatsoever on this ship, you pretty much have to run this universal seat as a science seat. So if you're looking for science powers, such as science team or hazard emitters, with hazard emitters being the one science power I see pretty much everybody using at a bare minimum. If you want to have hazard emitters, this has to be a science seat. You don't get a choice in that matter. But that's the one gripe I do have with the Archon and the Vizier, is it does kind of pigeonhole you into what you need to do or what you can do in regards to the ship. I would have made this second engineering seat, this lieutenant station, into a universal, and maybe made this ensign seat into a universal as well. Ran this lieutenant commander seat as a dedicated science, and then could have probably left the command and intel on that lieutenant commander seat, or maybe have moved it up to this commander seat here. So that's my real big gripe as far as the Archon and the Vizier go. But getting into our gear. Now we wanted to, or at least I wanted to do this as a proof of concept type of thing, to see what can the ship really do when we try to push it to its limits. Now in case anybody is curious, whenever you pick up the fleet version of the Vizier, you actually get a 4th tactical console, so that's the big difference there. Now really quickly, we'll look at our Starship Mastery. It has absorbative hull plating for some damage resistance to physical and kinetic. The rapid repairs, which is going to give a little bit of extra regen to our ship. Enhanced hull plating for free damage reduction to energy and radiation, which is always nice. And the armored hull, which is going to give us some extra hit points. Again, not going to sneeze at free HP. Now, for our shields, engines, deflector, and warp core, we have our trusty Kobali set on here. For our Kobali shields, they're regenerative shields, meaning they trade more capacity up front for a bit of extra regen in that regard, and regenerative shields, like they sound, typically have the highest regen rate in the game, but also typically some of the lowest capacities within the game, whereas covariant shields are the exact opposite of that. They tend to have some of the highest capacities, but the lowest regens. Now for the Kobali shield in and of itself, it gets a Rezal mod at ultra rare, meaning it's going to reduce all energy damage to shields by 10%, so no matter who or what you're facing, if you need just a singular shield, this is going to be one that could have some value for you in that regard. It's going to guarantee that no matter what you're facing, you're going to have some slight bit of damage reduction to whatever foe you're going against. And then if you wanted to further specialize against that foe, then you could change out some consoles and stuff as necessary. Now, the big draw to this shield is the fact that it buffs your incoming hull healing to self by 10%. So that's a good thing to have. Now, we're going to skip our warp core for a moment and go to our impulse engines. Now, our impulse engines are a hyper impulse engine, meaning they give more speed and turn rate at the higher engine power they have. So if you're in a big, beefy cruiser that doesn't have as much power to throw into the engines, then you're not going to get as much speed and turn out of them. But the real draw to these engines is the cooldown reduction they can give you. You're going to get a minimum of 3% up to a maximum of 10.5% recharge time reduction to hull and shield healing bridge officer abilities. Now, that's a godsend for a tank, because that's going to mean you're going to have your healing-based abilities available a lot quicker than you otherwise could have. And this will stack with other bits of cooldown reduction you can pick up in the skill tree and from your traits and so on. Now, aside from the cooldown reduction, they're essentially generic, run-of-the-mill hyper-impulse engines. So if you need just a singular set of engines and you don't need the healing, then these probably aren't going to be the best choice for you. There's going to be other options out there as far as a singular piece goes. Then for our primary deflector, it's pretty much, in my opinion, with a lot of primary deflectors, what you see is what you get. They're typically stat sticks. And in this case, we have a large chunk of hull healing and shield healing as well, some shield and hull restoration, some boost to their capacity, and a little bit of control expertise. Now, there are some deflectors out there, like colony deflectors, that do have some other secondary effects. But yeah, for most primary deflectors, pretty much what you see is what you get with them. So, there is that little bit. Then, coming up on our final piece of the Kobali set is the Warp Core. Now, I saved this one for last because it comes from the Kobali Samsar. Now, the Samsar is the old Kobali ship from, I believe it was the 6th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. And that was the first command ship we had access to in-game, actually, was the Samsar. And some of the ships, like the Presidio, which is another fun ship a lot of people seem to like, happened to follow not too long after that. And in fact, the console that comes from the Samsar, our regenerative integrity field here, is the 4th console out of that console set, if you're interested in running that. Now, our Warp Core in and of itself, this is probably the most potent piece on its own, in my opinion, from the Kobali set itself, as far as individual pieces go. Now you can see here it gets an amp mod at ultra rare, which is nice because it's going to give us a decent little bit of boosting, or a decent little bonus off of our Warp Core that's going to help with threat generation. It's going to be free damage increase based on how many subsystems we have with 75 power or more. So you can see we're only getting one, I guess, proc of that. I hesitate to call it a proc because it's not the right word, but one, I guess, stack or instance of that is a better terminology there. But it is going to boost our threat generation a little bit. Otherwise, if not for the capacitor, it's kind of a generic field stabilizing core that's more defensive based, buffs your hull restoration just a little bit, and gives more defensive value. Now, the strength of the core is its capacitor. It's going to regen your shields by a huge amount and give a little bit of shield power for 20 seconds. Now, I have seen people jack their shield restoration up really stupid high and be able to regenerate the shields of their team to pretty close to full, if not outright back to full, depending on what kind of shields they were running, ship, and so on. Now, this also completes our 4-piece Kobali set, and this is one of the main reasons we have the set on here is for the set bonuses. Now, the 2 and 3 piece are okay, they're not terrible, but as far as tank value, there are better in my opinion. Now, the 2 set bonus is some hull regen that's going to increase as your HP decreases. Your 3 piece is whenever you're at 25% or less, it gives you 15,000 temporary HP for 15 seconds whenever you get hit, and is only 2-minute cooldown. Now, the big strength to the Kobali set is in the 4-piece. This is going to, whenever you activate it, it can affect you and up to 20 people total, counting yourself. It's a 5-kilometer sphere. To you and nearby allies for 15 seconds, you gain 20% of incoming energy damage as healing. Now, that tooltip is slightly misleading because it clarifies down below. There is actually a ceiling to the amount of healing you can get and a floor to the amount of healing you can get. So it's a range. Anytime it procs, you're going to get anywhere between 100 points to 20,000 points of healing. Now, this can proc up to 15 times, or not up to 15, up to 20, it can proc up to 20 times per second for 15 seconds. There we go, got it sped out finally. Now, the average that I've seen people are going to get is about 12 procs per second. On average, that's what I see it typically awarding. So, it's going to be very rare if you're getting hit that you only get a single proc for 100 points. So that is pretty much guaranteed not to happen. Now, assuming just for sake of argument, to put this into perspective for people as to why this is so potent, if you were to get the full max triggers, that's 20 triggers every second for 15 seconds, you're looking at approximately, and I'm doing the math off screen for you guys, that would be 15 times 20, that's 300 triggers, and then if you multiply that by 100, you're looking at a minimum of 30,000 points of healing. Alrighty guys, there was one more minor little interruption in the recording there, but before we left off, we were talking about our Kobali 4-piece and discussing what makes it so darn potent. Now, we had looked at the math for the potential minimum amount of healing you're going to get, assuming you're getting the maximum triggers. Now, if you're getting the maximum amount of triggers, you would multiply your 15 by your 20. That tells you how many triggers you could potentially get, which comes out to 300. Now, doing the math, multiply that 300 by 100, and you get 30,000. Now, for our potential maximum that you can get, assuming you're getting all 300 procs, and you're getting the 20,000 each time, that is up to 6 million points of healing you're getting off of this 4-piece ability alone. And nothing as of yet that I've seen in-game is going to top that. As far as singular abilities go, the only other thing I've seen that can rival that is the Lucari Dorito console, just because of the nature of how that console provides its healing. Now, if you don't have access to the 4-piece set, if you don't have access to the Samsar, then in terms of total healing, if you need something with stupid amounts of healing, then I'm going to advise picking up the Lucari 4-piece set from the Reputation. That's going to give you healing comparable to the Kobali set. Now, the big difference between them is the Lucari set tends to be more of a heal over time type of thing, and the Kobali set is more bursty in how it awards its healing. Then, another alternative you could get for free that'll give a nice singular burst heal is the Soul Defense set, and that's also going to give some nice damage reduction as well. So if you don't have access to the 4-piece Kobali set, you do still have options. And in my opinion, if you don't have access to the 4-piece Kobali set, and you don't intend to run all 4 pieces, don't run the set. Unless you're looking for just a singular piece, because the 2-piece bonus and the 3-piece bonus are going to get outclassed rather quickly by other sets. Now, getting into our weapons. Now, our weapons are kind of a generic phaser setup, in my opinion. We have 2 of our sensor-linked phasers. This is going to give the benefits to defensive maneuvering and amplification, but that's going to be static all the time in exchange for the standard phaser proc that we would normally have. So that's a buff we're always going to have. Then we have our pulse phasers, which is going to allow us to essentially leech 10 damage resistance off of our foes. So that's going to buff us for 10 and debuff them for 10. So pretty nice to have. Then we have our inhibited phaser, Omni, in the back. This is going to potentially knock the engines offline of foes within 2 kilometers of the target for 4 seconds. So this could potentially, if, say, you have a science person in there that has grouped everything up with a gravity well for you, depending on how many targets there are, and depending on how closely grouped up they are, you could end up shutting off the engines for every single person in the group. So there's a lot of potential off of this proc. Then you also, whenever you're shooting at foes that are slower than you, you're going to debuff them for a -10 damage resistance rating. So that's a pretty good thing to have in that regard, especially for some of our escorty tanks that tend to be a little bit speedier. This is going to be a nice thing for you to have. This is going to let you increase your threat generation a little bit. We have our Terran Task Force Phaser, mainly for the radiation damage, and also because it's a nice, hard-hitting beam. Then we have our Prolonged Engagement Phaser, and I've gotten a lot of mileage out of this one. This one you can get now from the Phoenix boxes, or if you were there for, I believe this came out of an old Kobayashi Maru, or a weekend event, I don't remember which exactly. But I like it because it starts out a little bit slower in terms of damage when it comes to some of the other beams, but as the fights go, or as a fight drags on, it actually buffs itself. So yeah, a lot of good stuff can come from this beam. For your final weapon, you have the Wide Angle Quantum. Now the Wide Angle Quantums are essentially a standard quantum torpedo, but with a wider targeting arc. So I used this particular torpedo because it actually came with the ship. Gives me a little bit more flexibility than standard torpedoes in that regard. And there are other torpedoes that can hit just as good, if not a little bit harder than this. Actually, a lot harder than this. But I wanted to use this because it does come with the ship. Now you can get wide-angle quantums from the T5U Regent. I want to think the fleet variant of the Regent comes with one as well, but I'm not going to swear to that. I do know the standard Vizier and fleet Vizier give them, the Archon gives them, and I want to think the fleet Archon does as well. So if you like the thought of using the quantum torpedo, just because they use them on the show, then this is a good quantum torpedo to pick up. Now, as far as your devices go, I like to think of them as personal preference in that regard. There's not really a right or wrong answer as to what to use. Now, some of the ones I've gotten good mileage out of are the red matter capacitor, excuse me, and the energy amplifier battery is the two I have on this particular build. Now, there are other devices that can give very nice effects, like the temporal negotiator, that can work good for your bridge officer cooldowns. There's also Gemini hardpoints, deuterium surplus, the subspace field modulator. There's quite a few of these devices that are going to give nice effects. There is no right or wrong answer, it just depends on what you need for your particular build. Then as far as our consoles go, this is where it gets kind of fun as far as the gear. We have a couple of staple consoles, our binaural infusion circuits for a large boost to crit severity, and this is for a single item the largest amount of crit severity boost on a single item in the game currently. Nothing tops this. It is 26.2% crit sev that you're getting for free just by equipping this console. Now it costs 200 low-buy in the low-buy store normally, so it can be a bit pricey for people, but I always recommend people pick this up if they're looking for crit severity. It is the single largest boost in-game. Next we have our tachyokinetic converter, which is another low-buy console. Now this is going to give you a tiny bit of control expertise, a large amount of flight turn rate, as well as some crit chance and crit severity, and is essentially an RCS turning rate console and an assimilated module slammed into one thing. So it's basically, if an RCS and an assimilated module were to have a baby, this would be it. So that's what you have for our tachyokinetic converter. You can also still pair it with an assimilated module if you want to, and get even more benefits that way. Now for our regenerative integrity field, this also comes from the Samsar. It's going to buff our hull healing by a fair amount, and it's going to give a nice upfront burst heal whenever you use it, and it operates slightly different to the 4-piece Kobali set, and this one is, whenever you're dealing energy damage, you get up to 100% of that back in terms of healing. Now again, it is slightly misleading because there is a maximum amount you can get off of the proc and also a minimum. Now for 10 seconds, that's how long the effect goes on, you can get up to 50 procs, 5 procs a second. At 10 seconds, that's up to 50 procs. You're looking at about 560 points of healing every proc, so at a minimum, you're looking at 550. You multiply that by our 50 points, so about 27,500 points of healing, roughly. Or if you're doing the maximum amount of healing, which I have seen quite a bit, which can happen with the 4-piece Kobali set or this, so that's your 4468. 4468 multiplied by your 50 is 223,400 points of healing. Now that's not nearly as much as the Kobali 4-piece can potentially give you, but generally by and large the integrity field is going to stack that healing up faster because of how it awards the healing, whereas the 4-piece relies on you getting hit in order to generate the healing. Both are great to have, both are godsends if you need healing, and I know quite a few DPS users that actually use this console as well. Next one we have is our Dorito console, which is going to give some hull restoration and shield restoration, which is always nice. This is going to also, whenever you use it, give a substantial amount of shield regen and hull regen to the target, and that is going to get buffed by your shield restoration skill and hull restoration skill. So for me right now, anything affected by it gets a 392.3% boost to shield regen and a 430% boost to hull regen. And it is dependent upon the target as well. So if your target has poo for regen, they're going to get poo back. But if they have a decent amount of regen, then it just gets stupid. Now I have seen in some cases people using this console in some of those missions that are a defend the objective type thing, and if it allows you to heal the objective, I have seen cases where people, especially in Starbase Fleet Defense, have taken this console and healed starbases from nearly dead, if not outright all the way back to full. So pretty potent in that regard. Then we have our Metreon gas warhead launcher, and this actually comes with the Vizier. This is another one of those consoles that you need to complete the 3-piece if you want to run the Battle Cloak. Now, personally, I wanted to keep this on here for the engineering readiness that it gives. It gives a decent amount of turn rate and engineering readiness. This is going to cool down our engineering powers even further, and is going to stack with other similar effects that we already have. Now, as far as the torpedo itself, it's kind of nice. It can be a nice little AoE threat generator if you need it. Now, it's not the most potent thing ever, but it is a nice little something extra. And if you just like watching stuff burn, then I think you're going to be happy with this. For our science consoles, we have our Temporal Disentanglement Suite, which is going to give us some shield capacity as well as chance and severity based on aux power, and a little bit of shield resistance, meaning our shields are going to be harder to take down. Then we have our Ordnance Accelerator, which is going to round out our 2-piece with our Inhibiting Phaser. Now this is going to buff our projectile, our Quantum Torpedo, a little bit, as well as give some damage boosting to our phasers. Then the 2-piece is going to give us some additional phaser damage as well as additional turn rate. So that's always nice to have. Then for our tactical consoles, they're the easiest ones to explain. We have 3 vulnerability exploiters and 1 locator. Now they all give phaser damage, but they also, in the case of the exploiters, give some extra severity, and then our locator gives a little twinge of critical chance. Now on the ship right now we are running 22.9% critical chance resting, so that's a pretty decent amount. Truth be told, if we wanted to, we could swap this last locator off and go for another exploiter if we wanted to, because we would still be sitting at 20.9% critical chance, which isn't bad. And on holodeck, because of Endeavors, it's actually slightly higher than this, and it's about 23.5, I believe is exactly what it is. So still a fairly decent amount. Now, getting into our skills and our specializations really quickly. I'm not really going to go through the skills as far as individual points, because that would take quite a while, and At some point, I will have a video up on the channel explaining why I picked the certain points that I did, because I used kind of a generic, sort of one-size-fits-all build for most of my characters. But I'll have that on my channel, but for those people that just want to copy a build and go, this is what I have. We have our Lieutenant skills, Lieutenant Commander. Now, I run 3 points in Impulse Expertise generally because I tend to fly a lot of bigger, beefier ships, especially on this particular character. So that's just something extra that I can pick up from the skill tree without having to worry about slotting a potential RCS console. So that's just a personal choice I've made. You don't necessarily have to make the same one. Then there's our hull platings for free damage resistance in the Commander tier. And you can see some of the other stuff we have. We have our Captain tier and then our Admiral tier. Now, our warhead launcher that I mentioned before, the Metreon gas, is going to stack with this engineering readiness here in our skill tree. Now, as far as these little unlocks at the bottom, every so often when you invest so many skill points, you'll pick up additional things that you can unlock down here. Most of them are personal preference as far as to what you think would suit you better. The only one that for tanks I would consider mandatory is threat control, because otherwise you're leaving a free 100% threat boost on the table that you could otherwise be picking up. Now, as far as our specializations go, I have Intel Primary and Strategist Secondary at the moment. Now, Strategist is going to give some nice benefits based on whether you're in threatening stance or not, typically some healing, damage reduction, that sort of thing. Now, the main reason we have it is because of this diversionary tactics. This is going to give you a nice little AoE taunt that you can use, which is also, while it's active, going to buff your threat gen by 50% for a little bit. So this can be a nice little, oh crap, you know, I need to pick up threat off of somebody right away type of ability. So, when used at the right time, this can mean the difference between life and death for a teammate or perhaps multiple teammates. Then I like to pair it with Intel generally, because I'm at that point for most of my builds, the way I've been doing them, that I think, for me anyway, that I have enough healing in the build already, which frees me up to focus more on threat generation potential. Now, if you do need something that is more healing focused, then I would recommend using Miracle Worker as your primary instead of Intelligence. So either Intel or Miracle Worker are the two that I've got the most mileage out of as far as primaries when it comes to tanking, and the Strategist being the one that I've got the most mileage out of as far as a secondary. Now, touching base on our traits really quickly and then looking at our Bridge Officer seats and abilities before getting into our Japori and Beta Thoridar runs. Now, as far as our personal space traits, some of them I think are kind of self-explanatory and are basically stat sticks. The beam training is going to buff our beams a little bit. That's free damage since we're using beams. Elusive, that's going to make us harder to hit. Now, these superior versions that I have come from your K-13. You're going to have a slightly lesser benefit if you don't have the superior version. And also, that defense rating is actually unlimited. It's not going to wear out after 601 seconds. That is just a tooltip error. Point Blank Shot, which is one you can pick up from the House Peg mission for free Cat 2 damage boosting based on distance to target. Your Beam Barrage, which can stack up to 3 times and gives a maximum of 6% Cat 1 all beam damage boost. We have our career-specific trait of Last Ditch Effort, which is going to give damage resistance when Go Down Fighting is active. If you're an engineer or a science person, we can adjust your build to compensate for not having this particular trait. Repair Crews for some free hull repair and damage resistance. Inspirational Leader is going to buff most of our starship skills for 15 seconds, can stack up to 3 times, and is a nice little ability to have. Context is for Kings is going to give us either some damage resistance or some Cat 2 damage boosting, depending on whether we've been shot in the last second or not. So either they give us extra damage to smack them in the face with, or they give us some damage resistance to survive what they're throwing at us. Either way, we win. Then we have our Good Day to Die, which allows us to use our Go Down Fighting at any time that we want. Again, this is a tactical career-specific thing. If you're not a tactical officer, we can compensate to pick you a better trait. Lastly is Fleet Coordinator for free damage based on how many people are in your party, up to a 10% maximum, counting yourself, and a 2% minimum. Now, as far as our Starship traits go, I realize not everybody's going to have access to these, but assuming you're going hog ham, balls to the wall, these are the traits I've gotten great mileage out of. Now, we have our Attack Pattern Delta Prime, which is going to give additional benefits to our Attack Pattern Delta, and is worth potentially up to 15% crit chance and 37.5% severity for us. So, very nice to have. That's going to give us even greater threat gen. This comes out of the Delta Duty Officer pack if you're able to pick it up. Otherwise, it can be a bit pricey on the exchange. Now we have one of our C-Store traits here that comes off of the Arbiter. This is going to give a 50% power cost reduction for 30 seconds to our weapons, as well as 20% firing cycle haste for that same amount of time. Now I'm going to skip over the other two for a moment and come to the Weapon Emitter Overdrive. Now this one comes from the Juggernaut, the Vaudwar Juggernaut promo ship. If you don't have access to this, then again there's other worthwhile traits, but if you do have access to it and decide to run it, this is what you're going to get. Whenever you activate a cannon or buff ability, a cannon or beam buff ability for 20 seconds, you get a increase in your weapon power drain by 50%, so it debuffs you slightly in the terms of power cost increase, but it also gives you a buff of 10% critical chance for your weapons and plus 50 accuracy. Now, one thing to note here is if you're using this trait and the emergency weapon cycle at the same time, those power cost modifiers are going to cancel each other out, and you will still retain the other effects. So you'll still get your firing cycle haste, and then you'll still get your crit chance and accuracy. You just won't benefit from a cost reduction or suffer from a cost increase. So that's what you're going to have there. Redirecting arrays is if you're getting smacked as a tank, it can extend your fire at will duration. Lost the word there for a second. It's one of them days, apparently. But that can increase the duration on your FAW up to an additional 15 seconds. Then the last one we have is our Narendra trait, with the previous redirecting arrays being from the Tactical Miracle Worker. Our history, we'll remember, comes from the Narendra, and when it stacks up to the 30 times, can give you up to 30% all damage, 30% hull regen, an additional 30% maximum hull, and up to 300% threat gen. And it is 1% damage, 1% hull regen, 1% max hull, and 10% threat gen per stack. So, very, very potent benefits in that regard, and is one of the traits that I would consider borderline mandatory for tanks. Now, as far as our space reputation abilities, we have our precision for critical chance, our advanced target systems for the severity, energy refrequencer, and as long as we're throwing out damage, we're going to be healing at the same time. So that's a good thing to have in our energy refrequencer, and I have seen in some instances this actually out-heal the Kobali console and even the 4-piece in one or two instances over very long, prolonged fights. Next we have Tyler's Duality for free critical chance based on hull capacity. Then finally, our Magnified Firepower for a static Cat 2 damage bonus. As far as your active reputation powers, I really consider them personal preference. Some of the ones I do recommend are the Quantum Singularity Manipulation. It's going to buff your science stats and give a temporary cloaking effect for a time. There's Anti-Time Entanglement Singularity, nice little AoE kick in the pants and slow to foes, that is buffed by your exotic boost, including the Quantum Singularity Manipulation. We also have our Biomolecular Shield Gen. That's going to increase our shield regeneration for a hefty amount while you're inside it, as well as your shield resistance, meaning it's going to be harder to drop your shields. Nice little thing to have. Deploy sensor interference platform can pull threat off of you for a moment if you need to heal. So you have options when it comes to this. Now, touching base on our bridge officer powers. Some of them I consider to be kind of self-explanatory as to what they do, but we're going to touch base on them anyway. Now, we have our tactical team to redirect our shields, gets rid of boarding parties, and other nice benefits that we have with it. Our attack pattern Delta, which is going to set off our duty officers we're going to look at in a minute, a couple of them. It's also going to set off our Delta Prime, and for tanks, you're going to want to use Delta because it's going to do more for you than Beta will. And it's going to leech, at least at rank 1, up to 30 all damage resistance from foes. That's going to refresh on every hit. And it's also going to buff you for that same amount. So there is that little bit in that regard. So yeah, it's going to make you harder to kill and make your enemies easier to kill at the same time. Fall to spit beams everywhere. Torpedo spread to throw some torpedoes around. For our commander engineering, we have our engineering team to purge viral matrix and heal the hull a bit. Emergency power to engines 2 is a nice little get the heck out of dodge type of power. That's also going to set off one of our DOFs we're going to look at in a minute. That's going to allow us to reset our evasive maneuvers. Emergency to weapons 3 for the damage boosting it can give as well as weapon power. Then we have our reverse shield polarity, which is going to recharge our shields in a pinch based off of incoming damage. And it is possible, if you're only getting hit on the one side, to redirect that excess energy to the other shield facings and heal your entire shield grid based off of just that one side. Now we're going to look at our science powers really quick. This universal seat here. Now we made it into a science seat because, again, if we want science powers, that's what we have to do. That's one of the major downsides to the Archon and Vizier, but could be worse, I guess. Science team to recharge the shields and purge subnucleonic effects. Hazard emitters for the heal over time, damage resistance, and purging of dots and debuffs. Then finally we have the suppression barrage to debuff outgoing enemy damage by 20%. So a nice little damage reducer or pseudo damage reducer when we need it. I say pseudo because it's not technically us popping a damage reducer, but technically debuffing the enemy, if that makes sense to people. Now, our final two bridge officer powers that we have here are two of the ones from the winter event. And I've gotten some decent mileage out of them lately, and I was actually surprised at just how versatile these had been for this particular build. Now, first up, we have the Endothermic Inhibitor Beam. This is going to do a decent little bit of radiation damage, which is going to get stronger, of course, as you boost it. Then it also reduces targets' shield resistance by 20% for 20 seconds. So that's going to make their shields just that much easier to get through, and you're going to deal that much more damage to their shields, which can translate to additional threat. Then we have the Let It Go ability. Yeah, they really went there. But it's going to deal a decent bit of cold damage in space, which ignores shields, so we're finally seeing some more cold damage abilities in space. We also see that it's going to debuff them for a minus 6.3 all damage resist rating every second for 20 seconds. It can stack up to 20 times. So that is potentially a very, very large damage resistance debuff that we're throwing on foes. So that's 6.3 stacking up to 20 times. That is potentially a minus 126 across the board. And that's not counting other things that could push that even lower. So people could take even, or people or, NPC foes are going to take even more damage. So yeah, you can do some pretty stupid stuff with this power. So that's what we have as far as our basic setup. Our bridge officer powers in that regard. You know, we've got a decent amount of healing in the ship. We've got a pretty basic setup as far as I'm concerned for a tank. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at our Beta Thoridar run and our Japori run, and we've already recorded those already. So I will say I was pleasantly surprised by what I saw. I think you guys will be as well. But for now, folks, we will be right back. And here we are, folks, in our Beta Thoridar. We have a resident Wolf of Clan Timber that has joined us.
Yep.
Agreed to lend us some shenanigans for this run.
You have no idea. Wait for it.
So, I believe he is in his jellyfish.
And here, have that, and have that. Ooh, yeah.
Yep, he is.
Yeah.
So, they finally updated the packs over here on Tribble, and we've been kind of working with the ships. I'm going to be doing my jellyfish down the road. He's got his ready to go now. And it's been interesting so far from what we're seeing, but I wanted to plan mine out a little bit better. He pretty well had his ready to go. So, yeah.
Get over here!
Now, I have to ask, good sir, for some of my viewers, what are some of your thoughts so far on that jellyfish?
You know, it's a mixed bag. And I say that as we just annihilated through the first 3 waves. Oh! Hold on. Science power to the rescue, and get the hell out of here. I didn't say go away for...
Where the heck did they go?
Oh, don't worry. Most of them are coming back. Don't worry.
Oh, that's funny. So, if y'all can see the grouping, or what's left of the grouping...
We got 1 or 2 that's out of the range. They're going to be coming back here in a minute. Hold on. Hold on. That Vorcha. I see that Vorcha over there. He's coming back. He's coming back. We're about to hit him with a high yield. Oh, by the way, wham!
Jeez.
So, I gotta say, and we're doing my part of this actual review here in a moment. I'm okay with the torpedo launcher, but I think for most torpedo builds, you're probably not going to use it because its fire rate is so fast on the torpedo that comes with it, which is the quad launcher. It's going to just throw off cooldown reductions because most torpedo builds end up using ceaseless momentum, which is doing cooldown reduction anyway. You're going to end up where on your standard 4 or 5 torpedo launcher torpedo boats, it's going to be firing a lot more, which means other torpedoes aren't. Because its cooldown's already at 4 seconds. You fire just 1 or 2 off, it's back to firing, and then you've got 4 torpedoes and only 2 are firing, kind of deal. So that's where you have like energy weapons. It's not bad. It's probably just not the best torpedo option I would pick if I'm doing a torpedo boat. I would try to mix it with energy torpedoes. It's going to be perfect for supercharged weapons off of the Odyssey class because you can proc that thing constantly. The trait to me is really basically going to be the one thing you're proccing for survival. And the console looks like it's doing great, and the ship itself setup is great. But at the same time, I think there are other ships out there that can probably do just as well for a lower price, if that makes sense.
Fair enough. But there is one other question I do want to ask you when we get to your part of the video. I will save that for then. But For now, folks, you saw our beta thoridar run. One little potential minor hiccup there. Otherwise, our ship performed pretty decently, I would say. About what I expected out of this Vizier. But we're going to take a moment. We're going to go over to our japori run. We're going to see what we're both doing as far as our ships and how much threat we're able to pull, and we will be...
Alright guys, here goes the Japori Elite. We just tested this in Beta thoridar with Blade. He's joining us for this one as well.
Giggity.
Let's see what she does. Now, like I said in the intro, I'm not fond of the torpedo. It causes limitations for other torpedoes in the build. But we're going to try it to see what it does damage output-wise. Just to see for you guys. But if you're running torpedo builds or torpedo science builds, I think you're going to replace it with something else. I think it messes up the cooldowns, if anything, on other torpedoes. Blade's got a new tank he's recording, so that's why he's in a unique ship today.
Now, I have to ask, good sir, and I know we were talking about this off camera just a little bit, but as far as like a standalone torpedo, like me, I have one torpedo in this build. Yeah. Mainly because it came with the ship. What would you say as far as somebody like me that wants a single torpedo in the build and has access to that particular one?
I mean, it's an okay torpedo, but I mean, for me, it's like nothing to write home about. Like it's, and if it changes my mind here in a second, I'll let you know based on what damage it does. But to me, it's one of those torpedoes. If you're using one in the build, and that's the only torpedo you have, and you're needing to proc things like supercharged weapons or other things like that. You're just trying to proc off a lot of things based off of that singular torpedo. It's going to be good, but is it going to be the hardest hitting torpedo? No. Is it going to be the most stand-out awesome thing? Probably not. So it's kind of in that, it looks like it's going to be okay. Is it probably going to be the best thing you've ever seen? Probably not. Get in that gravity well. Only time you can tell. Here in a few moments, we'll know.
So, potentially decent, but probably not going to be your go-to.
I mean, probably not. I mean, and I could be entirely wrong based on how this goes, but I'm just not... I'm not seeing it when you compare it to things like gravimetric or the enhanced biomolecular torpedo or particle emission plasma. I'm not seeing it compared to those. Like, those you want in either a science torpedo build or just a hard-hitting torpedo build. Like, you want biomolecular, Terran Task Force, maybe the Saboteur vehicle, if you're trying to do a heavy torpedo boat. For science, gravimetric, particle emission plasma, potentially neutronic, which is something I'm going to try out in this build that we just did.
Okay, fair enough.
It just depends. It's fast firing. Like the tooltip's got 11,000 damage. That's decent. But let's see. Whoa! Okay, that's more damage than I anticipated in a Japori Elite. Let me just yeah, we're set to Elite.
And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, he crapped his pants.
You will too here in a moment. 278.5k.
Dear sweet merciful heavens.
That's actually fairly consistent. I spiked to 400, I dropped below 300, and I go over mostly 300 towards the end of the run. When that last group warps in, because they were not a part of the final gravity well. But that was the only thing. My gosh, max one hit of 294k, I had a crit rating of 41%. You did have 69% of the attacks, and apparently I took 30 and didn't feel it. Let's see, what did all that? The max one hit came from Delayed Overload Cascade 3, which is the 294. Deteriorating secondary deflector, 46k. Pets were 44k. One of them being the red matter distortion at 10k, Badlands Cyclone at 8, Chronic Turbulence 3 a few times. Let's see here. Gravity Well 3 did 37, Spore Infused Anomalies 25, Delayed Overload Cascade was 16, Plasma Storm 13. Here, yeah, then Particle Mission Plasma did 12. Trying to see where the radiation's at. Good grief. Yeah, there's a lot here. And I mean a lot here. With a target debuff of 88%. I'll have the parse in the description. But I think it did help that I was using, what was it? Tachyon Beam 1, because that was giving me an extra boost to my secondary deflector. Delayed Overload Cascade 3 does hit like a truck. So I might be able to make some minor changes here and there to the build for holodeck. But it looks like it reads the red matter distortion as a pet, and it did 10k. It did total hull damage of 1.2 million. No shield damage. It had a crit rating of 100% and a hit rating of 100%. With 2 kills and 67 attacks. So high crit chance for this thing. 100% criticals. Which is not bad. So, yeah. Is this ship powerful, especially with its layout? Yes. You know, it's goes without saying, there's a lot of science potential here. And I'm going to take a few lessons I learned here about what I've built, because it's obvious that concentrated firepower is not exactly what I might need in my final science build, considering what I just did is absolutely insane. So there'll be some changes, but all in all, it's a good ship. Like I said in the beginning, the trait doesn't really say a whole lot to me. And the torpedo is so-so. If I'm looking for the torpedo itself, it reads Photon Torpedo on the parse. It did 4.2k. And that's it. That's all the torpedo did. It did 18 attacks with a max one hit of 110. So it did okay, all things considered. And because it was the fastest firing, it was locking out other torpedoes, so that's why the other torpedoes in the build are doing less. But it's an okay torpedo. Nothing to write home about, in my opinion. Red matter, it did well. It did 10k, even though apparently its damage range is a little messed up. It did 10k damage, which is not bad at all, considering. But I think the biggest weakness is the trait of this thing. You're not going to get this thing for the trait just because, I mean, hell, even when I took apparently almost 40% of the damage, I didn't feel it. I didn't. I'm in a science tomb with 4 stacks of anchored, and I didn't feel it at all. So I don't necessarily feel you probably are going to need that, especially since I don't have personal endeavor points over here. I'll show you that. I don't. Hardly at all. But if you're wanting something that's nice and hard-hitting, it's a decent torpedo. The console's nice, but all in all, this definitely taught me some science lessons, because that is nice for a Japori Elite. For Elite content. Jeez. Alright, well, we're going to have to go and do the intro for this, and I'll have to take a few of these lessons with me. And we're going to have to challenge Blade to do a tank with this thing, because oh my gosh. Until next time, guys, this is Timberwolf, and I'm signing off.
Alrighty, folks, we're back from our Beta Thoridar and our Japori runs, and I have to say that the ship performed rather well, in my opinion. I know I was actually surprised at the amount of single-target debuffing the ship was able to do with everything that we have on the ship, so it actually surprised me a little bit in that regards. And after going over some of the data in a bit greater depth, off camera, speaking with our good buddy Timberwolf, I'm probably going to revisit this ship in the near future and put a dedicated disruptor build on here and see just how far we can actually push this debuffing potential of the ship with what we have. So that's something I'm probably going to do in the future. Now, I believe our good buddy Timberwolf has also released his jellyfish review, which is part of the runs that I helped him do, and he helped us do here on the channel. So definitely be sure to check that out as well. But it actually surprised both of us at how well the two ships held up. And it actually surprised us both just how much he was able to get out of that little jellyfish ship. I know I wasn't expecting it, he wasn't expecting it, so it was a pleasant surprise to the both of us in that regard. But now, as far as our damage for the run, it wasn't the highest we've ever done as far as damage potential by far, but we still held our own. It was still a respectable amount of damage, and we were able, or we would be able to get through pretty well any content in the game fairly easily with what we had. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to drag this in from off screen here. Alright, so you can see the damage breakdown here. Now, our good buddy Timber had close to 279k, whereas we were bringing in about 49 almost. Now, again, not our strongest showing in terms of total damage. Now, even Timberwolf, I believe, has said in his video, one of the reasons for this is he was soaking up so much of the damage that it kind of leached it away from us. And that's something even he has said and will probably say as well. So, even with that aside, we still did a respectable amount of damage. Again, not our strongest showing ever, but it'll get us through most content in the game. Now, if we go to our DPS chart, you can kind of see how it started out. Our good buddy Timber spiked to nearly 400, started to go down and slowly begin to level off. We spiked up to about 100k starting out, and then we just kind of leveled off a little bit. That's kind of how that ended up going, is just over time, you know, you blow a lot of your cooldowns at first to go nuclear, and then you just kind of taper off, I guess. Alright, now getting into our total damage in and our threat. Now, if you look at the total damage in, the total damage in is just about even in that aspect. There's not the greatest amount of difference between the two of us. So there were a few hits that the enemies managed to score that did kind of worry the both of us a little bit for a moment or two. So there was one or two little hiccups there, but again, that can happen, especially with a smaller ship like what he was using. Now, as far as the actual threat percentages go, if you look at it here, the total amount of attacks in was almost a dead even 70-30 split in favor of us having threat. So we were never in any danger, despite all of this going on, of actually losing threat. You can see the exact numbers, or we had 69.43% of the threat compared to Timber's 30.57, so you may as well say a 70-30 split in favor of us keeping threat. So even with all of the science shenanigans going on in there, we were still able to keep threat with our Vizier, and we were never in any real danger of losing it. So it could definitely hold its own as far as threat goes. Now, bringing in our, if it'll cooperate with me, so if we look at our combat analysis reports for ourselves, you can see, you know, most of our damage, phaser, phaser, phaser. I believe the largest singular hit from our phasers came from the Terran Task Force phaser, so a fairly good one as far as that goes. Now, our Metreon gas cloud, or not the gas cloud, but the torpedo up here, didn't do the greatest amount of damage ever. You're looking at about 1.2k DPS almost. But again, that's not really why I have it on the build. I have it there mainly for the cooldown reduction it can give in that aspect, and also because it could be a nice little AoE threat bomb when used at the right time. That's one thing I have discovered with it. So if you play it at the right time, it can actually be a fairly decent little thing. Otherwise, it's pretty good as far as its stats go for cooldown reduction. So that's kind of what we have for our damage. Let's go to our healing abilities. You can see how that broke down. Now, our energy refrequencer was actually our top healing ability. This goes back to what I was saying before, is that in some instances, over a prolonged fight, because you're always healing, you can actually get sometimes more total healing received out of this than something like even the regenerative integrity field, and in rare cases, even the Kobali 4-piece. So healing, or not healing, but energy refrequencer is actually a very potent power. I was about to say healing refrequencer in case you guys are wondering, but yeah. So move this all back off the screen here, get this out of the way. But overall, our ship held up rather well, in my opinion. We're probably going to revisit this one in the future and see just how far we can actually push the debuffing. Now, in regards to final thoughts on the ship itself, is this going to be one that I'm going to recommend for people that are looking to do pure damage? Again, like I said earlier in the video, probably not. If it comes down to people want to do damage, the Vizier is not going to lend you as many damage-oriented tools as something like the Archon is going to do, because the Vizier is command-based. Command typically has more survival-oriented tools than something like Intel does. So if you're looking for pure damage, you're looking to do just as many ones and zeros as you can, then if you're wanting to do it with a Sovereign class type of ship, I'm going to recommend the Archon for you in that regards. Now, if you're wanting to tank, which I'm assuming that's why you're here, if you want to tank, then if it comes down to the Archon or the Vizier, I'm actually going to recommend the Vizier, because the Vizier is going to give you more healing-oriented and survival-oriented tools that you're simply not going to get from the Archon. Both ships have value in today's game, it's just a matter of what you think you need for your own individual toolkit. Typically, I like to have more survival tools at my disposal that I could draw from if I want to, than, you know, damage-oriented tools. Not to say damage doesn't have value, but again, you know, tank. So, overall, our ship held up rather well. If it comes down to it, the Archon or the Vizier, the big question I'm going to ask is, are you wanting pure damage or do you want to tank? If you want pure damage, I'm going to recommend the Archon. If you want to actually tank, I'm going to recommend the Vizier in 95% of all cases. So that's just some of my thoughts on it. I rather enjoyed the ship. If you're somebody that enjoys a Tier 6 Sovereign type of vessel, you'll actually like the Vizier in my opinion. But anyways, folks, we'll probably revisit this ship in the near future, see just how far we can push this debuffing. But for now, folks, this is Captain Blade J52.